Hello, everyone, and welcome to another exciting version of Chip Talks podcast. I apologize if you just watched the last one because it'll be there with no audio. So hopefully we have audio working on this one and we're properly configured. So welcome everyone to Chip Talks podcast. And today we're going to talk about the endocannabinoid system and mental health. Okay. The first thing that I want to just start this all off with is the fact that if you have some mental health disease or you know someone who has a mental health disease, you're not broken. You're not, in a capacity where you can never be fixed. These are things that can be re-regulated. These are things that can be reconfigured, and you have a lot of control over how your body works and how your body addresses mental health. Now, we all think that, if we're uber depressed and we've been diagnosed with depression, that it's going to be that way for us for the rest of our lives. That's just not true in what I'm seeing. Okay. And again, you can satisfy yourself and go right down the same rabbit hole that I've been down. And we'll talk about what that rabbit hole looks like through the course of this talk. But that's the great hope for me, is that if you're disbalanced, if you're dysregulated, if you're, having, let's say, mental health challenges, it's not going to be that way forever. And there's likely ways that we can very quickly rewrite this situation. Okay. So isn't that cool? I think that's very hopeful, and when we go to, let's say, traditional sciences and traditional medicine, usually the message isn't that hopeful, right? It's sorry, you got it, here's your 12, antidepressants, and, see you when you die, bye, go to the pharmacy every month and get your stuff. So, no, you're a machine. You work in a very logical way. Your mind works in a logical way. Your mind works through chemicals that we're going to talk about. And those chemicals are managed by the endocannabinoid system. So the endocannabinoid system represents a very attractive target to help with mental health, with anxiety, with depression, with PTSD, with all of these things, okay? Schizophrenia even, and things like that. And we'll talk about why cannabis isn't so good for that later. Because again, this is the endocannabinoid system. This isn't just cannabis. So we're going to talk about how this system works, all right? So as a lead into that, let's first of all talk about, how it works, right? So you have an endocannabinoid system, but your dog has an endocannabinoid system. Your cat has an endocannabinoid system. Your bird has an endocannabinoid system. In fact, anything with a spine has an endocannabinoid system. Those things don't smoke cannabis, okay? So the way that you naturally and normally feed this endocannabinoid system is by dietary fats, all right? So 4 types of fats really feed this system. Saturated fat, we all get plenty of that from the meat we eat. Monounsaturated fat, which comes from nuts and seeds, and, nature, let's say. Olive oil is a big source of monounsaturated fat. And then the most important ones, though, and these are essential. And again, I don't know why we're not taught this in first grade. We're a vehicle, right? And we need certain things. And there's 2 things that are essential: omega-3 and omega-6 fats. Omega-6 fats cause us to inflame, and omega-3 fats cause us to deflame. So, that's just the way that you work. So if you're eating omega-3 and omega-6 fats in balance, then you're going to have a real, kind of dynamic and flexible state where you're going to be able to inflame and deflame and kind of manage things better. What we do right now is we eat an excessive amount of omega-6 fatty acids, which are inflammatory. And again, most of us don't eat any omega-3 fatty acids. I mean, name an omega-3 fatty acid that you eat right now. Ready, go. And a lot of you are going to say fish oil, and that is omega-3, but those are breakdowns of the main omega-3 fatty acid, which is called alpha linolenic acid, and is in chia seeds, is in hemp seeds, is in flax seeds, is in walnuts. But that's kind of where you find it most prevalent, and that's about it, okay? So and again, if you eat fish, that's okay, but you're basically eating the breakdowns of this alpha linolenic acid. And it's kind of important to force your body to go through that breakdown. But anyway, most of us eat, it's like 1 to 40. We eat 1 omega-3 to 40 omega-6s. And when we do that, we wind this really tight spring in the inflammatory direction. Now, how does it, and that is for anything, right? So any kind of immune event or any kind of mental event. So we all are familiar with fight or flight, right? So we've all had a fight or flight experience, loud noise, gunshot, firework, bear comes up behind you, whatever it is. But we've all had a fight or flight experience. So we know what fight or flight feels like. Well, a fight or flight is a reaction, right? We're reacting, and we're reacting with the power of this omega-3, omega-6 balance. So again, if we're pretty balanced, omega-3, omega-6, our fight or flight is going to be real dynamic. So we're going to be able to have a reaction and then bring it back, and we're going to be able to manage that reaction real tightly. Well, where we are right now at 1 to 40, we're so inflammatory that if we have a fight or flight reaction, it's very hard to manage that. It's hard to pull it back. So this is why we have such, and again, in what world, are people driving down the street and somebody cuts them off and they want to kill them? I mean, that's a strong inflammatory reaction, if you sort of equate that to mental status, right? So that's, people have, are reacting too strongly, and they don't have the ability to kind of dial back those reactions and manage those reactions. So that's inflammatory. That's a mental sort of look at an inflammatory event. If you wanted to look at kind of, what happens inside of you, again, we all kind of know what inflammation looks like, swelling and all that kind of stuff. But again, we're all winding this spring super tight in the inflammatory direction. How do you change this? Eat more omega-3s. Literally, it's that simple. Eat more omega-3 fatty acids. You begin to crank that spring down and balance it. And again, every meal we should be balancing omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. Now, here's another thing that sort of works in here is that saturated fat, so fat, let's say from animals, contains omega-3 and omega-6 fats by what they were fed, those animals. And so if our animals are not getting omega-3 fats, then we're not getting that omega-3 kind of transferred to us by virtue of that meat. And, what do they finish cows with? Corn. What's corn got in it? A ton of omega-6 fatty acids. They finish all meat because it fattens up the meat with omega-6s. But guess what? That causes that meat to be really heavy in omega-6s and not very heavy in omega-3s. And that disbalances your endocannabinoid system. So before we can even really talk about, let's say, good health or proper mental health, we have to get this right? So if we're not balanced omega-3, omega-6, you're fighting yourself. If we're at 1 to 40, it's going to be very hard for me to suggest things to you to be able to balance that response, because you're just a machine and you're setting, it's like putting sugar in your gas tank and me telling you, no, don't do that. And you getting a bad result when you try to drive your car. That's exactly what I'm telling you. This is just cause and effect. So if I give you more omega-6s over omega-3s, you're going to have a hard time managing any inflammatory response, including inflammatory responses in our mind, right? So what does this look like? I mean, do you have an event maybe somebody dies in your family? That's a reaction. You're going to have a reaction to that. It's going to be super sad, and, it might be very traumatic depending on how it happened and all that. Again, if you don't have the horsepower to dial back that reaction, it's going to linger, baby. And I don't care who you are or how strong you are mentally or anything. This is it's cause and effect. It's your machine. It's the way that your machine works. Okay. So again, if we have an anxiety reaction, we have something, traumatic happen to us in an anxiety reaction, going to be real hard to dial that back unless you're omega-3, omega-6 balance. It's going to be real hard to resolve what that is unless we're omega-3, omega-6 balanced. Okay. So before we talk about any of this stuff that we're going to get into, we're going to get into these systems and kind of how they work. You're fighting yourself if you're not omega-3, omega-6 balanced, and you're trying to sort of do things, let's say, for your mental health. So as silly and easy and kind of simple as it seems, oh, I have, horrible depression, eat more omega-3s. I mean, it doesn't say, wow, that's easy. But guess what? I mean, that's what we need to do. And again, alpha linolenic acid, not DHA and EPA. So you'll break that down and make those on your own. All right. So let's get into this a little bit. So really the way that we run our minds is through two chemicals. So dopamine and serotonin, GABA is kind of involved, but it's more kind of an energy thing. But really dopamine and serotonin are kind of the main things. So anytime you need to do something in your body, like blink or, sort of move things or change status, it's kind of serotonin. Dopamine more has to do with our mind and kind of reward. So, when we feel good about an accomplishment, right? So that's a dopamine thing. So dopamine and serotonin, though, are how we run and balance our mind. And what I want to kind of prove to you guys or take you through the literature is that the endocannabinoid system sits above this. So if I can properly, let's say, nutrient my endocannabinoid system or supplement my endocannabinoid system, but if I could properly nutrient my endocannabinoid system, it's going to be able to balance all this stuff, and it's going to be able to have a fine time balancing everything. So I'll be able to sort of go through things and recover and do everything that I need to do. All right, so let's and I hate to read to you guys, but I'll kind of explain to you what I'm reading as I'm reading. So this is about dopamine and the endocannabinoid system. So a number of excitatory, inhibitory, and modulatory inputs orchestrate dopamine neurotransmission by controlling dopamine cell body firing patterns, terminal release, and effects on postsynaptic sites in the striatum. The endocannabinoid system serves as an important filter of afferent input that acts locally at midbrain and terminal regions to shape how incoming information is conveyed onto dopamine neurons and to output targets. So the endocannabinoid system is sitting between these inputs and the dopamine signaling system. It's managing everything. In this review, we aim to highlight existing knowledge regarding how endocannabinoid signaling controls dopamine neuron function through modifications in synaptic strength at midbrain and striatal sites, and to raise outstanding questions on this topic. So again, they're postulating or they're proving, let's say through this paper, that the endocannabinoid system controls and manages dopamine neurons and dopamine expression by virtue of that. All right, this is the serotonin system and endocannabinoid signaling. So ample evidence from behavioral studies also suggests that endocannabinoids are important regulators of stress responses, and a deficit in endocannabinoid signaling contributes to stress-related disorders such as anxiety and depression. Now, if you're not eating enough omega-3 fatty acids, are you going to be endocannabinoid deficient? Yes. Yes. You have to build 9 different endocannabinoids from omega-3s. So again, if you're not eating enough omega-3s, you're going to be deficient in things like synaptomide. That's a pretty important thing on how you run your brain and our mental state. Okay. So the endocannabinoid system induced modulation of stress-related behaviors appears to be mediated, at least in part, through the regulation of the serotonin system. So serotonin is regulated through this system. And kind of what I just want to kind of prove to you guys, because again, this has more to do with diet. Okay. These guys get dysregulated more because of diet. It's not because mental health runs in my family. Well, it may run in your family, but this is because of diet. All right. I'm genetically predisposed to, XYZ thing. No, again, there is something there with, schizophrenia and things like that. So there is some of that, a little bit of that, but most of mental health, you control yourself by your diet. And if you're eating more omega-6s, you're setting a more, let's say, ability to have mental health disorders. All right. Okay. Let's move along. The endocannabinoid system, role in depression, reward, and pain control. So again, why do we do things, we do things because we get rewarded for doing those things. So this is an important sort of aspect of how you think and how our minds work. Clinical studies reveal altered endocannabinoid signaling in patients with chronic pain. That's absolutely true. In fact, there's altered endocannabinoid signaling in almost every disease state. All right. Can you fix that? Yeah, eat more omega-3s. It's just, it's shocking that it's that easy, but it is that easy. And even I'm sitting here telling you guys this, and you may or may not likely do it. We're kind of so programmed. Considerable evidence suggests the involvement of the endocannabinoid system in eliciting potent effects on neurotransmission, neuroendocrine, and inflammatory processes, which are known to be deranged in depression and chronic pain. All right, so all these systems are basically dysregulated in depression and chronic pain. And again, what's our regulatory system? The endocannabinoid system. Several synthetic cannabinomimetic drugs, cannabinomimetic, I think I said that right, drugs are being developed to treat pain and depression. However, the precise mode of action of endocannabinoids on different targets in the body and whether their effects on pain and depression follow the same or different pathways remains to be determined. TBD on that. But again, the big thing here is endocannabinoid system is involved in kind of managing pain and managing depression. So this is PTSD. So the endocannabinoid system is a therapeutic target of PTSD. Studies suggest that different medicinal cannabinoids and again, this is cannabinoids, but at distinct doses and formulations could represent promising treatment strategies for the improvement of overall PTSD symptomology, as well as specific symptom domains, also influencing quality of life, pain, and social input. Although there is a robust rationale for treatment with drugs, the target the endocannabinoid system and results are promising. Further studies are needed to investigate the safety and efficacy profile of their prolonged use. So again, this is saying that modulating the system is advantageous. Let's look at something real quick. Always scary to go off the reservation, but let's just do it. Because I didn't directly do this, or actually, let's look at anxiety, because we can look at any aspect, but I imagine there'll be studies here. There should be, yeah. So researchers who found people who took high doses of omega-3s seem to have the most reduction in anxiety symptoms. I'm just kind of proving this to you guys that, we'll prove it sideways. Depression. So let's find it more specifically. Yeah. Yep. Cognitive impairment is frequently observed in patients with major depressive disorder. High doses of omega-3 are going to help that. Omega-3 fatty acid supplementation in the treatment of depression. So you can see there's a lot of, here's a Nature article. So I always like Nature articles. They're real good. So went off the reservation a little bit, but it was beneficial as I hoped it would be. So you can kind of see that, again, the endocannabinoid system is driven and fed by dietary fats. A dysregulation in omega-3, omega-6s puts us in a real inflammatory state. And being in an inflammatory state causes us to react and not be able to kind of control those reactions. Simply adding omega-3s helps us balance this situation. Now, we all we're talking about the endocannabinoids. You're talking about the endocannabinoid system, Chip. You got to talk about, cannabis. So let's throw that in there, because again, cannabis somewhat supplements the endocannabinoid system. It doesn't supplement it perfectly. And really, dietary fats are the proper way to modulate the endocannabinoid system. But is there evidence that we can kind of, let's say, get in there with cannabis and cannabinoids and supplement what's going on? Kinda. So let me read you this. This is a study. In summary, effects of marijuana on anxiety disorders are complex, and I would agree. So there's good and bad. The endocannabinoid system appears to play an important role in responses to stress and anxiety. It absolutely does. We just proved that with about 12 studies that I shepherded you guys through. The two primary active ingredients in marijuana, THC and CBD, appear to have differing effects with regard to anxiety. Pure THC appears to decrease anxiety at low doses. So that full spectrum CBD is going to be really, really good to help reduce anxiety and increase anxiety at higher doses. So something good to know if I'm a bud tender. If somebody comes in and they have anxiety, again, don't take them to the sativa shelf, boys and girls. Don't take them to those high THC strains. They're going to be better with the, mid THC, higher CBD. They're going to be better with a lot of beta caryophyllene and linalool. So again, you don't want to tweak out somebody who has anxiety. That's going to hurt them, not help them. On the other hand, pure CBD appears to decrease anxiety at all doses that have been tested. Okay, so that's super good. So CBD is going to help anxiety almost no matter what, and almost at any dose. So, if you want to use, let's say, CBD and THC and you have anxiety, again, a full spectrum, CBD type oil is going to be the best thing. Now, the study goes on to say, let's see, where was I at? Those who are concerned about marijuana increasing anxiety are unlikely to use it, whereas those who use it and find it to be beneficial presumably continue to use marijuana. Well, no joke. If it works, you're going to use it. If it doesn't, you're not. Doing so may offer some benefit in the short term, at least in terms of anxiety. But well-controlled studies indicate the use of marijuana is associated with increased likelihood of substance abuse disorders in the future. I don't know if I agree with that. But certainly there is a risk, for cannabis use disorder. This is something from this is from Canada, and it's from their Center on Substance Abuse and Addiction, and it has to do with cannabis and cannabinoids. So let's kind of read this to you. And again, this is kind of CDC-ish, I guess is the best way to say it. So regular cannabis use refers to weekly or more frequent cannabis use over a period of months to years. Regular cannabis use is at least twice as common among individuals with mental disorders, including schizophrenia, bipolar, depressive, and anxiety disorders, and post-traumatic stress disorders. So if you have one of these, conditions, what this is saying is you're, more likely, let's say, to use cannabis. There is strong evidence linking chronic cannabis use to increased risk of developing psychosis and schizophrenia among individuals with a family history of these conditions. There is evidence of that. And again, with schizophrenia in particular, and some aspects of psychosis. And this one is just kind of not true. Although smaller, it's there. There's a risk, but it's 0.0001%. So although smaller, there's still a risk of developing psychosis and schizophrenia with regular cannabis use among individuals without a family history of these disorders. Other factors contributing to increased use of developing psychosis and schizophrenia are early initiation of use, heavy and daily use, or use of products high in THC content. Whatever. But cannabis use is associated with poorer mental health outcomes in PTSD. Now, I'll take you back to that study that we just read, which says that, again, with PTSD, let's go back to that study. I nuked that study to do the omega-3 things. But anyway, we had a study, that basically said that, some cannabis products will help there. Okay. So there's some contradictory stuff, let's say, and what the Canadian government is shoving down our maw there. And so this is the last thing that I'll kind of walk you through, and this CBDs and depression. And so there's lots of, let's say, clinical evidence, as we would expect from the studies that we saw, that CBDs will help with depression, and they do. So there's lots of evidence of that. Okay, so I think you guys are getting the idea here that first of all, so we all have an endocannabinoid system. Anything with a spine has an endocannabinoid system. We configure this system, and it's our master regulatory system. So it's a very important system. It sits in function above our central nervous system. It sits above most systems, and it certainly sits above serotonin and dopamine, which are how we drive our mind, right? So it presents, let's say, something that if it's not properly regulated, we're going to have a hard time doing anything underneath it. We're going to have a hard time, regulating stuff if this guy's not properly regulated. In order to properly regulate our endocannabinoid system, we have to balance our omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acid input. If you're not doing that, let's say I have depression and I want to use cannabis to help with my depression. Well, if I'm not balancing my O3, O6, I've got to, climb up a giant mountain before I can even begin to try to, help myself with what I'm doing. So omega-3, omega-6 super important. The most important thing I've said throughout this whole video. You know, well, and again, I don't know that I need to say anything else. So we're going to leave it there. Omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, you know, you have to balance those in order to balance your endocannabinoid system. Super duper duper important. Anyway, thank you guys. And we'll see you next week for another exciting version of Chip Talks podcast.